Ethan Carter never expected a quiet weekend at his mountain cabin to turn into a showdown with the most entitled woman in the county. The cabin sat deep in the woods behind a private access road and a locked security gate, a place Ethan rented out occasionally but mostly kept for family gatherings and peaceful escapes. Then one afternoon, he discovered that a local HOA board member named Karen Whitmore had been telling people she had reserved the property for a massive community celebration involving nearly 100 guests. There was only one problem: she had never contacted Ethan, never signed an agreement, and never received permission to use the land. What happened next became the kind of story that spreads through an entire town. Instead of giving in to pressure, Ethan followed every rule to the letter and watched Karen's elaborate plans unravel in real time. Bro, the level of confidence she had before everything collapsed was absolutely unbelievable. Ethan first learned something was wrong on a Tuesday evening while reviewing bookings for the upcoming month. His cabin business was simple. A few rentals here and there, mostly families, hikers, and people looking to escape the city for a weekend. The property itself was valuable because of its privacy. The cabin sat on 40 acres of wooded land at the end of a gravel road, and the only entrance was through a heavy metal gate controlled by a keypad and remote access system. Nobody entered without permission. At first, the warning signs seemed small. Ethan received several emails from strangers asking about parking arrangements for an upcoming event. One person wanted to know where charter buses should unload guests. Another asked whether the outdoor stage would be covered in case of rain. Ethan stared at the messages in complete confusion. He had no event scheduled. There was no stage. There were certainly no buses coming to his property. The deeper he looked, the stranger things became. A local catering company contacted him requesting final headcount numbers. A portable restroom company wanted confirmation on delivery times. A landscaping crew asked whether they should arrive Friday evening or Saturday morning. Every message referenced the same event, a community appreciation festival supposedly taking place at Ethan's cabin. Bro, hearing this would have made anyone suspicious immediately. Ethan started making calls. After nearly an hour of conversations, one name kept appearing over and over again. Karen Whitmore. Karen wasn't just any resident. She served on the local HOA board for a large upscale subdivision located a few miles away. Around town, people knew her reputation. She loved organizing events, inserting herself into community decisions, and acting as though every property in the county existed for her convenience. Most people tolerated her because arguing often created more headaches than cooperation. But this time she had apparently taken things much further. Ethan eventually found a social media post advertising a huge community celebration scheduled for that Saturday. The event page featured photos of his cabin, his lake, his picnic area, and even aerial images of the property. Hundreds of people had already interacted with the post. Some planned to attend. Others were bringing relatives and friends. Karen had presented the entire event as a confirmed reservation. The more Ethan investigated, the more unbelievable it became. Local vendors had been promised access to the grounds. Food trucks had been invited. Volunteers were organizing games and activities. Several attendees were traveling from neighboring counties. Everything had been arranged as if Karen owned the place herself. And yet Ethan had never spoken to her. No rental agreement existed. No deposit had been paid. No permission had been requested. Nothing. At first, Ethan assumed there had to be some misunderstanding. Rational people don't organize 100-person events on property they don't control. Unfortunately, Karen wasn't operating on rational assumptions. She was operating on entitlement. When Ethan finally reached out for clarification, he quickly discovered that Karen fully expected the event to happen regardless of what the actual owner thought. That was the moment Ethan realized this situation wasn't going away quietly. And what Karen did next transformed a bizarre misunderstanding into a full-blown disaster that would leave her scrambling only days before the event. The next 48 hours turned an already ridiculous situation into something far more serious. Ethan expected that once Karen realized the actual owner had discovered her plans, she would cancel the event and apologize for the confusion. Instead, she doubled down with a level of confidence that genuinely shocked him. Word spread quickly through town that the cabin owner was questioning the festival. Rather than slowing down preparations, Karen accelerated them. More vendors were added. More attendees confirmed their plans. Volunteers began posting schedules for activities throughout the day. Every public update treated the event as a certainty. What made the situation even worse was that Karen started presenting Ethan as the unreasonable party. She framed the dispute as a minor technical issue that would be resolved before the weekend. Many people believed her because she spoke with absolute certainty. That's exactly how people get away with things sometimes. If someone sounds confident enough, others assume they must have authority. Meanwhile, Ethan documented everything. He saved screenshots of advertisements, collected emails from vendors, archived social media posts, and spoke with several businesses that had been contacted regarding the event. For the evidence painted a clear picture. Karen had spent weeks organizing a gathering on property she neither owned nor controlled. Then came another surprise. A neighbor called Ethan and mentioned seeing workers measuring areas near the cabin entrance. When Ethan drove to the property, he found temporary signs stacked near the road. Some directed traffic toward guest parking. Others welcomed attendees to the festival. Whoever delivered them clearly expected hundreds of people to arrive. Bro, this part was unbelievable. Karen wasn't acting like someone who hoped the event might happen. She was acting like someone who had already convinced herself she couldn't be stopped. As Saturday approached, Ethan consulted an attorney and reviewed every detail regarding access to the property. The answer was simple. The land was private. The gate was private. Nobody had legal permission to enter without authorization. He wasn't required to accommodate the event, and he certainly wasn't responsible for Karen's promises. By Friday afternoon, excitement around town had reached a peak. Vendors loaded equipment. Families packed coolers. Volunteers prepared supplies. Nearly everyone involved expected a huge celebration the following morning. What they didn't know was that Ethan had spent the week preparing something of his own. He wasn't planning a confrontation. He wasn't planning an argument. He was planning strict compliance with every property rule. And when hundreds of guests began arriving at a locked gate the next morning, Karen would finally discover the difference between acting like an owner and actually being one. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, and for a brief moment Karen probably believed everything would go exactly as she had planned. Long before sunrise, Ethan was already at the cabin. For he completed a final walk around the property, checked the security cameras, confirmed every access point was secure, and made sure the main gate remained locked. Every step he took was completely legal, completely reasonable, and completely within his rights as the property owner. Then the vehicles started arriving. First came a few volunteers. Then vendors. Then families. Within an hour, a steady line of cars stretched down the gravel road leading toward the entrance. Some people had traveled for hours expecting a full-day festival. Food trucks rolled in. Delivery vans appeared. Portable restroom contractors showed up expecting installation instructions. Everyone had been told the same thing, that the event was approved and ready to begin. Instead, they found a locked gate. At first, attendees assumed there had been a delay. But as the crowd grew larger, confusion spread quickly. Calls were made. Messages were sent. Questions started flying. Nobody seemed to know why they couldn't enter. Karen eventually arrived and immediately found herself facing hundreds of increasingly frustrated people. She had spent weeks promising them a seamless event. Now she was standing outside a gate she couldn't open. And that's when reality finally caught up with her. Ethan remained calm throughout the entire situation. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He simply informed vendors and attendees that no reservation existed and that no authorization had ever been granted for the gathering. When several businesses asked for clarification, Ethan showed documentation proving he owned the property and had never approved the event. The mood shifted instantly. People who had trusted Karen began realizing they had been misled. Vendors demanded answers. Families complained about wasted travel time. Contractors wanted compensation for scheduling losses. Every minute that passed created more pressure. Bro, hearing how fast everything unraveled honestly blew my mind. Karen had built her entire plan on one assumption, that nobody would challenge her authority. The moment that assumption collapsed, so did everything else. Within a few hours the crowd dispersed. Vendors packed up. The festival was cancelled before it ever began. But the consequences were only getting started. By the end of the weekend, several businesses were seeking reimbursement for expenses they incurred based on Karen's representations. Community members were furious. Screenshots of her promotional posts circulated everywhere. Instead of becoming the organizer of the year's biggest celebration, Karen became the center of a public embarrassment that nobody in town would forget anytime soon. The fallout continued for weeks after the failed festival. What surprised Ethan most wasn't the cancellation itself, but how quickly public opinion shifted once people learned the full story. Many attendees initially arrived believing there had been some last-minute misunderstanding. After seeing the documentation and hearing from vendors who had been contacted directly, they realized the problem had started long before Saturday morning. Several local businesses publicly stated that they had accepted bookings based on information provided by Karen and her organizers. While some absorbed the losses and moved on, others demanded repayment for deposits, transportation costs, and reserved equipment. The financial consequences began piling up much faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, the HOA board found itself facing uncomfortable questions. Residents wanted to know why one of their representatives had been connected to such a chaotic situation. Meetings became tense. Complaints increased. People who had previously ignored Karen's behavior suddenly started examining her actions much more closely. As for Ethan, he returned to normal life. The cabin remained exactly what it had always been, a private retreat managed on his terms. The locked gate that had frustrated so many people became something of a local symbol. It represented a simple lesson that most people understood immediately. Ownership isn't determined by confidence, popularity, or assumptions. Ownership is determined by facts. And when those facts were finally tested, Karen's entire plan collapsed under its own weight. Looking back, the entire situation felt like a perfect example of what happens when entitlement collides with reality. Karen spent weeks acting as though rules applied to everyone except her, and for a while it seemed like she might actually get away with it. But that's exactly how these stories usually go. The bigger the assumption, the harder the fall when facts finally enter the picture. What stuck with Ethan wasn't the embarrassment Karen faced. It was the reminder that boundaries only matter when people are willing to enforce them. Had he caved under pressure, hundreds of people would have learned the wrong lesson. Instead, a locked gate and a little patience exposed the truth better than any argument ever could. Bro, the wildest part is that Karen's entire disaster was self-inflicted. Nobody ruined her plans except the person who made promises she never had the authority to make. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more unbelievable HOA drama, entitled Neighbor Meltdowns, and satisfying karma stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you have done if someone tried to take over your property without permission?